First, let me introduce and let me ask the panelists to come to the stage. Iris Bouwers, please come up front. Iris is a policy advisor of international affairs at the Dutch farmer organization LTO, the Netherlands. The second one, Angelantonio D'Amorio. Angelantonio is a food policy and sustainability advisor for the European Livestock and Meat Trade Union, UECBV. Angelantonio, welcome. Then Anna Lóránt. Anna, she is a senior policy analyst at the Institute for European Environmental Policy. Welcome, Anna. And then we have two representatives from the European Commission. First of all, Tassos Haniotis. He's the Director of Strategy Simplification and Policy Analysis at DG Agri. And Dusan Chrenek, Principal Advisor of the Energy Union Governance in the Director General of Climate Action in the European Commission. I think we have a great panel here. Listening to the opening address of the member of European Parliament, Bas Eickhout, it was already mentioned that there is tension. There is tension in the Netherlands. I know it myself because I'm member of a national advisory committee on this issue, on environment, and then comes the discussion. The discussion is about the role of livestock. Is there a role of livestock? There is clearly two opinions. One is, if we want to stay within the planetary boundaries, probably it's better to get rid of livestock production and to stop consuming meat and dairy. It was in the presentations this morning as well. But there is another way of thinking, and that is probably the livestock system, the food system, as how we developed that over the last 50 years, is not the optimum and the best one to stay within the planetary boundaries, but we can change the system. These are two radical transitions. One is to take out something of the food system because of environmental reasons, and the other is to really change the food system from environmental reasons with another position of livestock. And I give you one thing to think of. Think about transport and cars. Do we say, well, cars are polluting, causes climate change? We stop using cars, we stop producing cars, a world without cars? Or do we think, let's go for a complete other transport system with cars for the future, lower emitting, environmental better cars? Well, if we have that in our mind, then this is also the question with livestock. But let's go to the panel. So my first question I want to raise to the panel, and that's also the question that I also come to you audience, think about it, listen to the panel and make up your own comments on this part, is what you think is important in a transition? What do you think is the essentials? What are the priorities? What are the conditions? And Iris, can I ask you first to make an initial statement on that?
You can, thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here, Martin, and thank you so much for involving farmers in this debate, because that's how I feel it. Many times when being here in Brussels around, we see there are a lot of discussions going on about climate change, livestock, and the role of livestock in climate change. Unfortunately, not that many times actual farmers are involved, and I'm very grateful today that's the case, because next to being the international policy advisor of LTO, I'm also an active farmer. I feel that amongst the people I'm farming with, especially younger farmers, tend to be open to transition. And that's key for me, because I see that if farmers are willing to change, get the opportunity to change, they will actually do that. What I feel is really important in this case is to reward the farmer for its craftsmanship. General measures, as also been proposed by Bas Eickhout earlier today, will not do that. I think we need a way in changing that actually every farmer can keep up. And those who can't might not be fit to be farming in 20 years, but there are solutions for those as well. So I feel that farmers at this point need perspective, and therefore I'm strongly urging not only scientists, as we have a lot of them today here, but also the European Commission to prevent a lock-in, to prevent a situation in which we will need another farming policy every 5 years that has radical changes in it. I think we need an integral solution in which science can play a big role, and what actually can offer farmers now and in the future a perspective. So I'm looking at the Common Agricultural Policy, I'm looking at the Farm to Fork strategy, I'm definitely looking at national implementations to gain and to get to that point where we can speak of a systemic change. Because, and that's probably not an LTO idea or position, but if I take a look at my own farm, I'm farming 1,250 fattening pigs right now. If I could go back to 100 fattening pigs and could, well, be a farmer in future as well, if I could make money with that, that would work for me. Because actually that would create a situation in which I could have more attention to the individual animal and probably also a nicer job taking care of my animals. But that's not the situation today, so I'm strongly looking at the Commission at this point and also at science as a whole. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Iris, for this statement. That brings me actually to the second panelist that I want to ask for the perspective from the European Commission, DG Agri in this case, Tassos. What do you think on transition towards a climate-smart European livestock farming?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. Let me clarify. Tassos doesn't have the ambition of thinking for DG Agri globally. But anyway, what I will say is actually a lot of the thinking that DG Agri has put in preparation of the proposal we made, and also in making the link to the Farm to Fork strategy, which we started discussing before. We even had a new commission already last spring with our colleagues in DG Santé. Now, the first thing that we have to understand is the phase at which we are in. Agriculture in the form of sustainable 4.0 was already presented and mentioned before. So this farming 4.0 is nothing different than the entry of the farming sector into the digital era. Actually, the farming sector didn't enter with some delay. It entered from the beginning into the digital era, but not in all aspects of it. And what does this imply? Let's look at what was not termed farming 3.0, but was the previous major transformation in the food systems. It solved economic problems by increasing enormously productivity. It solved social problems by making food affordable, but it did it at the cost of the environment. It might have taken one generation to discover the full extent of what the Green Revolution meant, but that's the result of it. Today, what farming 4.0 potentially could do is to solve economic problems and environmental problems at the same time by increasing the economic and the environmental efficiency. But it does by generating social tensions of various ways, including of the interpretation of what farming 4.0 means. But this is not new only to the farming sector. Food is the basic need of basic needs. But the same type of challenges we face, whether we talk about shelter, whether we talk about clothing, whether we talk about energy, whether we talk about transport. So you mentioned the cars. The issue is not to do away with everything that we have done to be able to meet climate change or environmental challenges, but see how more efficiently we can do things. And here, one thing in my mind is clear, that the question is not do away with livestock and we save the planet. In fact, if we do away with livestock, we're going to put the planet probably in a worse situation because we're not going to have enough land to produce the alternative proteins that are necessary unless we do it all in the lab, which will create other type of social tensions. But let me link this challenge to the proposal we made with an example, because we don't have time forever. The example that the Portuguese livestock sector brought in the treatment of land and permanent pasture land. What did it do? It increased the income of farmers, objective number 1 of the new CAP proposal. It increased productivity, number 2. It allowed to better link these farmers with a broader economy, not necessarily the food chain, but some exchanges. That's objective number 3. It clearly had an impact on environment, on climate action, and on biodiversity, the 3 environmental objectives. It allows younger, more educated farmers to get in with higher types of jobs linked to the type of systems that are produced, and it also potentially generates more growth in rural areas, the other 2 social objectives. Well, it failed in one thing. You didn't really improve the antimicrobial resistance in the animal health, but we can grant you that because you did something else. You helped a lot in modernization. Why do I mention this? Because we didn't come up with this proposal just to make fun of it or without thinking. In fact, we worked over a year and a half on an impact assessment that clearly classified and specified which are the challenges, which are potential solutions. And the last point, the starting point of all the discussion about the future of the Common Agricultural Policy should be what is already in the proposal. The starting point is the latest available scientific evidence. If the satellite maps tell you you have a soil erosion problem, you better come up with a strategic plan that addresses soil erosion. And there you have all the flexibility you want to make sure you address it and increase the level of ambition. Now, could have become better? I'm pretty sure it could have become, and I know areas it could have become better. But the risk I see is not in the proposal that we made on the table, but in a manner that already others start thinking, we cut this, we throw out this, we prolong it in a couple of years, and the rest. Thank you for this round.
Thank you, Tassos. We had now 2 statements of 2 of the panelists. I want to ask the other panelists to respond a little bit briefly on these first two statements. Your turn will be in the next round to be the first one to respond with a statement. But Anna, what's from your perspective the color on this issue?
Thank you, and thanks for having me here today. We heard many interesting points by the other 2 panelists. I would like to highlight 2 of those. One is the importance of involving farmers in this transition, and the other one is the importance of rewarding them for the delivery of public goods. And I can't agree more I absolutely agree with those 2 points. What those 2 points tell me is that this transition is not only about technological fixes and new technologies. We need to go beyond that. We need social innovation. We need a new governance system that can enable those changes, that can reward farmers for those public goods that they are delivering. And then also we need a completely new contract between the society and farmers compared to the one that we currently have. So we certainly need to involve them.
Very good. Angelantonio, your perspective.
Yeah, first of all, we have never to miss from a philosophical perspective that human being has always lived in a transitional phase. This is very important. But if we analyze our recent past, we have noticed where the different variables of this transition towards the better are. And that allows us today to focus on which are our priorities. Within the priorities that I heard before, for sure, there is a not only during this panelist, but also during the presentation, need for mitigating the sector. So how to mitigate the sector? The sector cannot improve its performance in terms of mitigation without a stable model as a function of time. So we have to agree on a stable model which doesn't change, but at the same time which doesn't take into account business as usual scenario. So it's very complex, all of that. And then of course it's important to continue supporting the livestock sector in terms also of research. So for instance, our association is now involved in a Horizon 2020 project, which is called the Water to Return, where we have found solution in order to mitigate the slaughterhouse processes by producing microalgae and also to produce heat, electric energy. Yes, I'm not talking about grid discoverings, but if we look at the whole process integrated, it allows us to go to a point where we have zero waste, and so it allows us to carry on successfully this transition.
Okay, thank you. Dusan, sorry.
Farmers are very important in the whole process in achieving climate neutral Europe. This is really about the whole society, about whole economy. We need a transformation of European economy, including agriculture. When last year we prepared a long-term strategy for a climate neutral Europe, we look at all sectors. Sectors that are emitting greenhouse gases. There are some sectors that they emit much more, energy sector, transport, also industry, buildings, but agriculture is producing emissions also around 10% in the EU, and therefore in order to achieve climate neutral Europe, also agriculture should contribute. That's evident that agriculture has lower mitigation potential, but still there is a need for efforts in these sectors. In order to have net zero emissions in 2050, we need also things, carbon capture, and that land and food system also plays important role. What we need is to motivate farmers to take new business models that are sustainable, that are helping environment, climate, and common agriculture policy is a useful tool. In our long-term strategy, we looked also in agriculture and animal production, and from our analysis, there were several possible options how to improve productivity, how to improve this sector. It was precision farming, also selective breeding, feed management, also to use more anaerobic digesters, and how to manage the whole production. Of course, what also IPCC find out, it's also about consumption, that also slight dietary changes, they have huge influence on emissions. So that is something that is also important to take into consideration. From our side, we are also looking how to help farmers, and we are working together with many association scientists that are present also here, also on carbon farming, how to improve management, and also how to help farmers. So there is a clear need to motivate farmers, to give them incentives, and to reward them for eco-services. So this is a way, and we are ready to work with all actors in order to achieve it.
Okay, thank you, panelists. Actually, what I learned from you, but also from the presentations this morning, is that, yeah, we think about the livestock production in a climate-smart society, then we have to think broader than only technical, simple technical measures mitigation. It is about a system approach. And also what I have in mind is that when you look at from a system approach, that you come to other solutions, that you come to another transition than when you look at from single technical mitigation options. But what I also see is that in reality, in the parliament and in the politics, but also in the society, people want to think in simple solutions and not in the system approach. So I want to, this was the panel for the first time, now it's up to you. 5 comments that you want to address to this panel, that you want to have an opinion on the panel, but take this point into account, how we come from a kind of narrow thinking on simple mitigations to a really integrated thinking of a broad system-based mitigation.
Thank you. My name is Trond Kvale from the Savory Nordic Hub. I think the essentials is about the microbes. The microbes are in our stomach, on our skin, in the soil, in the food. And one presentation gave us an important point on the nutrition in the food. And I think microbes, that way we can communicate with the consumer and the farmer, because the farmers in Europe are now very afraid they're going to lose the Roundup. We need to communicate that we can do this in a better way and in a sustainable way. And I think really sustainable agriculture, that's kind of status quo. We need to regenerate agriculture. And we need to think holistic. Thank you.
Okay. I saw an opinion there, it's 4, so there is room for one more, but first yours.
Patrick Worms, President of the European Agroforestry Federation. The one thing that as scientists we know is that the biggest difference you can make to the performance of farming has to do with the management of that land. Agroforestry demands a skill set that is not taught in agricultural colleges. So does silvopastoralism. The problem that we have is that there is no market mechanism for bringing that skill set into farming communities. If I'm selling a tractor, if I'm selling fertilizer, if I'm selling a drone, if I'm selling an app, I have a cash flow that I can use to do more research, to do more marketing, to do more lobbying. Trees do not lobby. How do we work with the public sector to solve this fundamental issue that we have to make farming more efficient?
Thank you. The number 3 was there.
Thank you very much. Andreas Janet from the Joint Research Center. I have a question to my colleagues, but also to the other members in the panel. When do we have, this is going into the governance of climate smartness in agriculture, livestock agriculture. When do we have on our products in the single market in Europe, the carbon footprint or the ecological footprint on our milk, meat, etc.?
Okay.
Sune Christensen from the Danish pig meat industry. I think my question is mostly to the Commission officials. It's nice to hear that livestock is part of the solution, no? And we're in this transitional phase. Well, I was just wondering in relation to the Green Deal and all the elements therein, how, if you can just elaborate a little bit on how do you see the livestock sector being in there? Also, this is a very concrete question, will they be gained access as well to sustainable finance mechanism? We're also talking about the European Investment Bank and so forth. So a little bit on their role there and opportunities.
Yeah. There are 2 in a row, so I allow you 2, and then we have.
I'd just like to reply directly to your challenge, how we go from tools to systemic solutions. Thank you very much for your example with our Portuguese project, which is integrated, and so I can build on the lessons from that, which is, I think you can only build integrated solutions when you have people who look at things in an integrated way, and people who will say, well, I can't deal with that because I'm not an expert on that. We have to have people that are able to touch on everything which is relevant for a problem and deal with it. And that only, and now I put on my university professor hat, that can only be dealt with training. Because the issue is that we train biologists and we train agronomists, and it's not only that they have different knowledge, but it is that implicitly they are given different value systems. And biologists will care about nature, and the agronomists will always be very practical and say, oh, come on, but farmers need to make money. And so we need to go beyond that. And so I would certainly say that the solution is training for young people and for ongoing professionals.
Last one.
I'm Reimer Böge from Germany, president of the German Animal Breeders Association and a former MEP. I still remember a plenary debate with Franz Fischler, the previous commissioner. And he said in this debate, only economic, healthy farms can deliver ecologic goods, full stop. And I think this we never should forget in this debate. And second, yes, technology is important. Imagine we could succeed to bring the capacities from leguminosus plants to other plants, to assemble nitrogen from the air. What sort of progress this would be. So I would also say to say a yes to modern technologies, including digitalization, but also plant and animal breeding is an absolutely must. And the second element, of course, the sequestration is very, very important, and I think also within the agricultural reform, there are many possibilities. For example, on my farm, every 5 years, I test my soil, which I'm plowing, how the organic mass, how CO2 is developing. And then you have clear results, and we can give indications to farmers where the real needs is and where we have a common interest in environment and agriculture. I had, last word, a discussion some months ago with Professor Latif from the Geomar Institute in Kiel about ruminants. And I said, look, there was a discussion, we have to deliver something. But at the same time, extensivation versus intensivation is not the answer. If I have a cow, just simply, 1/3 of the methane comes because the cow is there. And so this means also that the cow with 10,000 kilogram milk production is economically a better one than those with 5,000 kilogram. So we have to see everything in a broader context. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, audience, for bringing up a couple of issues that really addresses the change towards a system approach. The microbiome, the land management, the distinguished products, the economic interventions, the training, and how to use the modern technology in a good way to make this transition happen. Iris, what's your idea now?
I was a bit worried you were going to ask what's the solution.
No. What's hanging in your mind at the moment that you want to share with this audience?
Something that I, as a farmer, and LTO as an organization, has been quite busy with for the last month has been nitrogen in the Netherlands. I'm not sure whether everyone saw the huge protests of the farmers who were going on a strike, which is really weird in essence. But it also meant something, and it also meant something to me, because there were a lot of my colleagues and my friends up there protesting the policy. At this point, in Europe, we only have 5.6% young farmers, and it's not increasing yet. So something really needs to change in the overall approach to make sure also in future we have people in the countryside, people working there, people delivering the public goods we all think are necessary. But there's a lot going on. It's not only climate change, I don't need to tell you, it's environment, it's biodiversity, and from the very left I heard the words zero emission, and that's something that's not a very positive outlook, is it? Because apparently the things you're doing are not good, because you have the emissions and you don't have the tools to change anything at this point as an individual farmer, and that makes you feel not powerful, maybe even on the contrary. So that's something that's going through my mind, and that also I know a lot of people are struggling with. And I'm happy with also the helping hand of the Commission that has been offered already, but with words like we need to have more sustainable businesses or more newer business models, we're not there. And that holistic approach, that's something we really need, not only now, but also in future, I'm sure.
Thank you. Tassos, hearing those 6 comments.
Yeah, and let me also start with the worry of Iris, because what we're talking about now is making proposals that, if they come up to be successful, the benefits are going to be when you come at my age, and there are many decades before that. Because we shouldn't have any illusion that agricultural is one of the sectors where transition is taking place tomorrow. It's one of the sectors, if not this sector, that has the lowest long-term rate of return overall, and that explains to a large extent why there is an issue of generational renewal. First thing, coming on the trees, because your trees example allows me to tell you what we try at least to do with the proposal. Because I used to give the example of why do we need to measure the width of the hedges, we need to see the impact of hedges on the environment, soil erosion, and the rest. The same thing applies for trees. Because last time we made the proposal with the logic that we're going to move towards greening. And at the same time, we had all this research that was coming out, and I was saying how beneficial it is to have trees in farms for windbreakers and all the other type of positive effects they have. And we ended up with all the modifications and amendments making a proposal that forced farmers to cut down the trees at the margins of their fields and remove exactly the same benefit that we wanted to introduce. So when we talk about a holistic approach, the first thing we need to have in our mind, all of us that are involved in policy decision making, is to think twice when we make a proposal, what is the desired outcome. And if there is something beneficial now, it's a shift towards an emphasis on performance. And if there is an emphasis on performance and stays until the end, and I remind you this, we have plugged in the articles there that force, if you want, the beginning of the strategic plan to be the latest available scientific information, then some progress could be, and then you will find the incentives that you want in planting trees, because true, there is no market mechanism that is going to pay for that. Now, in terms of the Green Deal, I don't know if you want to say, we're not in the position right now to say...
Sorry, Tassos, I interrupt you here because this is really the bridge towards my next point that I want to address, and that is about the European Green Deal. What can we include in that new Green Deal from all this kind of challenges?
The Green Deal is the attempt exactly to have a holistic approach in all the senses of it. It is not by accident that the Vice President of the next Commission has under him exactly all the Directors General that make things that are linked. And by the way, okay, it's nice to call about breaking silos, it's nice to think that we are all working in silos, but if you look at the impact assessment we did, all the DGs were already involved, not probably in a perfect way, that's why we have a new Vice President to look at what we're doing, but that's the issue, that's the priority. We need to focus on the understanding that when we talk about net zero emissions, everybody has to contribute.
Okay.
And agriculture is the sector with the recognition that there will always be some emissions from agriculture, probably lower than what they have been today. If I may add a last point on technology fixes, or will we talk about it
later on?
Fine.
Because now I want to move to that European Green Deal, new Commission, European Green Deal, and I'm very interested to hear from Anna, from your perspective, the environmental policy perspective, what you want in that new Green Deal, what should be in there?
Thank you. Let me start by saying that I know that this specific event is on climate smart livestock, but I would actually prefer to use the term sustainable livestock, which is obviously it involves climate smart, but it goes beyond the climate objective, and I will come back to this point later on. For me, the success of transitioning to sustainable livestock farming in the EU relies on essentially two components. One is, and the other one is the already mentioned holistic approach, both when it comes to the objectives and also in terms of the utilization of tools available in the sector to drive this transition. And I think the Green Deal has potential to deliver on all these elements. However, there is certainly room for improvement, and I would like to highlight 2 points in that regard. One is that climate is one of the biggest challenges we currently face, but it's not the only one. And we also have a biodiversity crisis affecting us. And addressing these challenges in isolation or focusing only one of them will essentially lead to trade-offs that we better avoid. We don't want to be net zero and at the same time lose our biodiversity. So our recommendation here is to put sufficient emphasis on all these objectives, in particular climate and biodiversity, and that means to be more specific, to come up with more concrete proposals to address biodiversity. There is slightly more emphasis on climate currently. The other issue I would like to highlight is the differentiation or the intervention on the production and consumption side. Many recent studies, including there is one that we published not that long ago on EU net zero agriculture, shows that intervention on the production side will not be efficient to go to net zero. We need to change our consumption patterns, and that will deliver, as we just heard this morning in one of the presentations, not only environmental benefits, but also health benefits. We need to have healthy and balanced diets. And in the European context, we see that our animal protein intake is certainly not balanced, and it needs to be reviewed carefully. The global situation and other parts of the world face this challenge differently, but there is certainly an issue that needs to be better addressed in the next coming years.
Is there a role for livestock in balancing between the planetary boundaries and the healthy boundaries?
Personally, I think yes, because we should not forget that livestock delivers or has the potential, livestock farming has the potential to deliver many benefits for the biodiversity, for example. So there is certainly a role, but the current system is simply not sufficient to get there. Thank you.
Dusan, serving the Commission, having this job, this task for the next years. What you're expecting, what you want.
Green Deal is not only about emissions. Green Deal is about healthy planet, healthy people. Therefore, it has much broader range. Of course, climate should be an important part of it, and there is a need really to have this common goal of climate neutral Europe by 2050, and to create a good legislative framework to give stability, to give also quite certainty which way we are going. But another important issue, it was already mentioned, is biodiversity. Sometimes there are trade-offs about emissions and biodiversity, but still we should look at this issue together. Another issue is circular economy, how we are using our resources. Because our current model is to produce, to use, and to throw away. And we should change, and we should change it also in the food sector. Another important issue is from farm to fork strategy. And this is the whole change, not only agriculture, but also food waste, how food chain is functioning, including transport, everything in food chain. And Commission is working on it to preparing. And of course, common agriculture policy is extremely important. But in order to fulfill our objectives in these areas, we need also finance. We need also sustainable finance that also banks, funds, they are looking at how to promote sustainable financing that to support projects, they have positive effect on the planet and not something that it's not going to be useful in the future. And for finance, this is also like that European funding in the common agriculture policy, but also in research. The Commission is also preparing just transition fund because sometimes some sectors will be hurt and it's necessary to help them. It's not only about coal mines, but sometimes also maybe in agriculture there will be need to support farmers and to give them fair transition. Structural funds, they should be used also for sustainable financing, and there are several funds for innovation, modernization, and of course, science. We need good research, and also in agriculture, there are many projects on soil, on food system. We are, as DG Clima, financing small pilot project on carbon farming. So in order to help to have this transition, what is important also that in the CAP there is a proposal to have compulsory advisory services, really to help farmers with sometimes complicated issues, because it's not so easy to fulfill all obligations and in further to create new innovative models. So also countries, they should support farmers in all sectors in order to prepare them for this transition, to help them in this process and achieve sustainable agriculture, sustainable also cattle farming.
Thank you. Angelantonio, what do you think can the industry with green deals, are they attractive for the industry?
So, well, the Green Deal, it's, in my opinion, but also for several discussions with other colleagues also coming from other sectors, still a kind of black box. Of people, when you say Green Deals, they are scared. They say, what is there behind the Green Deal? Me personally, I think that the Green Deal will not reinvent the wheel. At least that's the impression that I had from the institution. But will re-endorse what is already existing and what has been already assessed during the previous year. So before we have mentioned for instance, the Sentinel Copernicus tool, yeah? So I think that from a scientific and public use point of view, it's something very useful for everybody to assess so how much organic carbon there is in the used oil. What we can do now is to go deeper and to have much more precise figures, and it would allow us for sure to understand better how to use manure where we need manure, or where we need livestock manure micronutrients, for instance, yeah? In a sustainable manner. And then another example can be, for instance, I haven't heard anymore about the Habitat Directive. It is something, you know.
Well.
But
In Holland,
Yeah.
all of the economy is flattened down due to the Habitat Directive. Actually, that is the point, not about the...
But about grasslands, if we talk about grasslands, Habitat Directive, the dried grasslands habitat, which is directly connected to livestock as it is a secondary grassland, so it's not a primary one.
Yeah.
So then what else? And then I will close. Before I heard about the youngest generation. That's true, and it's very important. In our sector, we have a lack of workers. So young people, they don't work anymore in the livestock value chain. We have to take that into account. If we will lose the youngest generation, then all the value chain, it's over, right? And then, of course, holistic approach, vertical integration are for sure keywords.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, dear panel, for the second shot. There will be a very short last shot at the end with technology and research. Tassos, I don't forget that. But I think it's time to take up a few of your opinions, audience, on this black box, as was said, but high ambitious, Green Deal, holistic approach, integrative approach, where consumption and production are in balance, where we play not only with food security and energy security and water security, but also with resource security, and biomass is an important resource. And what can circularity do, not only in the traditional circular industry, but also in the food system, a circular food system? How can we finance those ambitions towards sustainability? And how can we make good perspectives for the young generation, the next generation, including the support to the farmers, the next generation farmers? Who wants to raise one? Did I saw two? One. Jean-François.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. No, I'd just like to wear a different hat now and say that I coordinate European Horizon 2020 project, which is about coordination of research on agricultural soil carbon sequestration. And we had in this project a large survey to farmers, not only in Europe but internationally, so we could understand what are the main barriers for them to transition to, let's say, soil carbon sequestration. And quite prominently, we could see two barriers. One is about dedicated advice to farmers, because although they have some substantial advice in Europe, it doesn't seem to be enough on that specific topic. And the second barrier was some funding for transition years, because apparently they are losing some income when they transition in their systems. So I just was thinking this might be useful for the conversation.
Okay. I saw a comment there. Three, and for time reasons, you're the last one.
Yeah, Wolfgang Trunk again. I already said that I'm in DG Sante dealing with this farm to fork strategy, and I understand ATF as a research oriented forum, and therefore we heard a lot about holistic approach. And for me, as a, let's say, as a user of all this information, of this research, I would like to encourage you to make a proper analysis how all these different criteria for sustainability can be measured or can be aggregated into a final strategy. We will come up with an action plan, a concrete action plan. This will be then undergo all these procedures. So there is still time to develop methodologies to really get factual policy making instruments established.
Okay, thank you. Last comment from the audience over there.
I want to come to the point of the perspective for young farmers, because actually I'm a master's student of bioscience engineering at KU Leuven, but I'm also a farmer's son, and at the point at his life where he is considering continuing the family farm or breaking it down. And actually when I hear all the different views from the different people gathered here today, actually I think that there is more pessimistic view than optimistic from my perspective, because there are 4 different points I want to mention here. First of all, the number of phytosanitary regulations, animal welfare regulations, and environmental regulations is ever increasing and ever becoming stricter. So it makes the life of farmers difficult, more difficult every day. Together with that, the current CAP reform will run on a lower budget after 2020. So there are already a lot of noises telling us that, rumors telling us that there will be way more conditions to be met for farmers to get access to subsidies or any support, which is a major concern when your branch of agriculture you're active in is taken into that part of the CAP. And above that, there are those international trade agreements, which we have seen the last years, like CETA, TTIP, well, it has been abandoned, but CETA and Mercosur, which are actually quite strange in the context of the policy Europe is developing right now, because what are we actually doing? We are actually getting those productions from overseas, where there are other regulations, way different regulations from over here, and we are actually, as European farmers, exposed to competing forces from other countries where these regulations put way less pressure on farms over there. And to finish, I want to mention the different public opinion over here about animal welfare, the way people are concerned about it, and the way they express it everywhere. There is a certain pressure on farmers about their activities because they are continuously criticized about whether they apply good animal welfare practices, and I don't think that these critical voices coming from famous people and celebrities too are equally spread over the globe, and like Professor Lóránt in his presentation a couple of presentations ago told us already, there are celebrities telling very strange one-liners which impact the global population and give them false information which affects farmers directly.
Okay, thank you for sharing those concerns with us, especially from the young generation. I think when we think about a perspective for the future, for that young generation especially, we have to take up these concerns. And how can we change concerns into, trust in the future? Because food is business. And how can we work on that way? Actually, I want to give the floor for the last time to the 5 panelists, so these are your last words, and I want to ask you to include in this last message from you, because it is Animal Task Force, because we are thinking about what is the role of science in the role of livestock in the future sustainable, healthy food system. To take that up, and Tassos, you already started there. You wanted to made a comment on technology. I think it's also from science, but your last message to this group, including that.
Okay, if it's the last message, well, we're talking about science. Well, you get the message. Science is the provision of truth with a confidence interval or a margin of error. Here it speaks in economics with some background in econometrics. And that's the important thing. It's not the absolute truth, but it's a truth with a certain level of confidence we have at a certain point of time. And the problem we're having right now is we're talking about baselines, and we've seen the confidence intervals of all the scientific evidence we have, and it's quite big. That shouldn't stop us from action, because we know damn well that we have to do many things with central addressing climate change. But it should make us aware of the fact that there have to be some feedback loops where we learn from what we're doing and from the inevitable mistakes in applications and be able to correct them. And here is what I wanted to say about all this big debate about the term technology fixes, as if technology has to be another black and white dilemma that we have to face. Technologies are relatively neutral. I mean, we can tweet on our smartphones, but that's neutral. What we tweet is anything but neutral. And what is extremely important in this debate we're having is to see that we have three very important gaps that we have to address. One was already mentioned. It's the gap of the transfer of knowledge. That's what farmers. But we also have a gap in the generation of the basic knowledge. By the time that your research projects will be done, we would have already made some proposal that probably would have forgotten half of the conclusions they have. That's why the feedback mechanisms are extremely important. And knowledge is also the biggest gap we have in Europe, is the gap on perceptions about what science could do. Several of you mentioned Copernicus. I mean, there are few things where Europe has the lead right now worldwide that like this, few things. Yet I can tell you that one of the constraints that we faced when I thought that my legacy in DG Agri would be introducing agro-environmental indicators in the farm accountancy data network. It's not going to be my legacy, because what is the stumbling block we have? Wageningen already completed 2 years ago a big research project with 10 member states in being involved, the confidentiality of data. Which data? Because there are private data that should belong to farmers, and by the way, the New York Times article that we gave our individual data is nonsense. We never gave individual data to anybody, including the World Bank. It's aggregated. But this data should always remain the property of the farmer. But when we talk about a public good, when we talk about land use, when we talk about what goes in the soil, in the air, in water, in biodiversity, what should be private about that? And what is public? And how do we address this issue? Because to talk about farming 4.0, which is the digital aspect of farming, and forget that we need to resolve this issue, because without the use of big data, there is no digital economy, I think we're going to miss the point. And being around and seeing us in Europe losing the technological advantage we have in biotechnology, almost destroying everything at a certain point with a vaccination of children. Now we managed to get back some of the problems. We have to address this issue head on. Do we believe that science has a major contribution to make with all the caveats that this implies? Or are we going to have another false ideological debate with black and white, whether we go one and the other direction? And livestock, and that's why central in this, is central in this debate.
Thank you, Tassos. Anna, what is your take-home message for this audience? What's there in your mind now?
I have 3 points, actually. The first one, I would like you to leave this room with a positive message. So, indeed, we face with a very complex challenge, and we need a holistic approach. But it's not impossible, and it's certainly not an excuse to delay action. So we need to act, and we need to act urgently. My second point is that these actions, many of the actions that propose to address these challenges are actually have the potential to bring opportunities, new opportunities for farmers, for producers, and others in the supply chain. So it's not only about losing or cost, but it's also potential benefits, new supply chains, or other cost savings. My third point is on science. Science can certainly play a major role, but what's important is that science and the results that science delivers to us gets translated to policy and action on the ground. It's really nice to have scientific papers, but we need to make sure that those scientific papers and those results presented are actually delivering the actions and delivering the change. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Angelantonio?
Yes, about the science. I'm an agricultural scientist and also environmental scientist, so I have the both hearts, agronomist and environmental scientist. I think that science can help and will help for sure the transition, but we have to be very careful. Before there was a slide of Professor Leroy about the nutritional aspects of livestock products. And it has happened recently that talking about policy strategies, I've seen during institutional presentation, the comparison in a very generic way, which from a nutritional point of view, it's not fair, about proteins. So vegetable, animal proteins. So is that science? It's not very fair science, I would say. So science should have fair approach and go deeper without staying, let's say, too much outside this correct methodological approach. I think this is one of the main arguments. And then, for sure, the challenges from a scientific perspective, as mentioned before, are for sure organic carbon in soil, nutrient flows, and for sure, and the Animal Task Force, I know that likes that, but it's absolutely right, manure management. So we have to work a lot on manure management for livestock. Thank you.
Thank you. Dusan, what is your take-home message for this audience?
Science is extremely important, and I'm glad that now even politicians, with some exceptions, they are listening to the scientists and they are acting. Sometimes slowly, but now they are really active. And it's not only politicians now, but the whole society. And many scientists are doing excellent job, like Mr. Domingos, and there are thousands like them, like that. Really, there is a huge movement. People, they support it. Business. So really, it's a broad movement almost everywhere. And that gives me really more optimistic view. And furthermore, even now, scientists, they say that it's feasible to address climate change. That even with the current technologies, we can achieve it. And technology goes forward in a really extremely fast way. And definitely we will have something that will help us more. But we have to address all areas in order to have sustainable reform that gives us results and also brings opportunities. And according to our studies, actually it's not going to hurt economy, it could help. And the EU is a good example that reducing climate change is possible even with economic growth. And that I think that is a good example also for other countries. And together, everybody together could help and really to achieve that climate, that emissions will not destroy our planet, that we will have a healthy planet.
Thank you. Thank you. Iris, you was the first panelist to take the word. I give you now the last word as a panelist of this panel. What's your take-home message?
Actually, I'd like to finish in the same way I started, involvement of farmers. I do believe science is the key to come to solutions in the sector for the challenges we currently face. When I take a look at those people who take up a farming job right now, and especially the 5.6% of farmers who, well, is younger than 35 years, those people are taking up great challenges to be an entrepreneur in a slow changing system in a very fast changing world. And I'm happy that also today I heard that only economic viable farms can deliver public goods. Because it's very, very hard to think green when your numbers are in the red. And especially for that reason, I would like to quote Bas Eickhout, someone I do not agree on many levels with, but in one thing he was right. And for that reason, I'm looking to the institutions when it comes to research, to science, especially also at DG Agri and Clima. Put your money where your mouth is. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, panel. I have one question for the audience. Who of you is younger than 35? Can you stand up?
Oh, that's okay. Oh. That's okay.
That's fine. There you go.
How do you go home? With more perspective or less perspective than this morning? Who has more perspective now, has more trust now, hearing this all, that we are on a route, that we can make a sustainable future with this next generation? Well, we made a little progress, Jean-Louis. But I think this panel is a great present for the Animal Task Force, for the 9th Animal Task Force seminar. I think we can make a very good report out of this year's theme with the help of this final discussion and with the presentations of today. I will not wrap up what's been said because the panel did it so excellent that I cannot do it better. So I close this session and give the word back to Jean-Louis. Thank you, panel.